Internet, I want to introduce you to something here. We're going to speak to two clowns here, Air Force officers just now. But our friend Robert Earl is a flight engineer. You've seen his program before, I hope. He's doing something marvelous. He's having a charity event where he's going to tow an aircraft, and as you know, the man himself is wheelchair bound. And he can explain to us what he's doing and how he's doing it. I know it is with Neil Ellis, the famous Gunship pilot. It's one of their projects. And let me just play this for you, and then we will go to the actual main event here.
Hi, good morning. My name is Robert. For those who don't know me, in the aviation fraternity, I'm probably better known as Bob or Bobby Earl. And I just want to introduce you to another charity challenge that I'm about to undertake shortly. I paid a good old chopper pilot friend of mine a visit in Joburg some time ago, a couple of months ago. And during the conversation, he mentioned that he was aware of a young lady in her early 20s who had an accident, broke her back, and obviously and subsequently paralyzed. They also come from an extremely poor family, and they obviously struggle big time financially to meet all her basic needs and healthcare, etc. And I just felt the Lord put it on my heart to do another fundraising for this lady. So the plan is, and my aim is, to pull this little light aircraft behind me for at least 100 meters, maybe even more, hopefully. Depends on how fit and I'll be, because I only have 5 weeks that I had to train. So anyway, the thing about this pull, it won't be just pulling the aircraft. I'll be doing it on my wheelchair, being an incomplete paraplegic myself, so I know all about the struggles, medical problems, etc. with such an injury. And I just urge you, all of you, if you feel like it, to please donate for the cause, and let's try and get this lady at least just the basic medical care she needs, etc. And right, and I'll speak to you later and update you as we go along. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Hello, Internet. We are back. I've got two clowns here in front of me. Sorry, Air Force officers. We're talking about a book, All Seriousness, written by Stephen Coetzee, Honoris Causa holder. It's a very good book. I must tell you, I had the time to read it. I've actually got it here with me. I can show you. Perhaps not the best of pictures, but it's available in South Africa as well on print of demand. Don't know what it costs, but whatever it is, it's worth it. It's wrongly named. Actually, the book is called something like Stephen Coetzee, Southern Africa Personal Perspective. And then it says the life and adventures and experiences of Steve Coetzee. I would have called it a love affair. Steve Coetzee's love with helicopters, hovering, and his daughter. That's what I would have called it. But once you read the book, you will find out it's not just Steve's story. And I'm really impressed with this book because it gives a background, the historical background of South Africa, which I didn't even know about. Especially the last few pages, it gives a few hard facts about apartheid South Africa, which will rock people's world. For instance, the black people had more cars during that time than the rest of Africa combined, things like that. And now I've got Steve here as the author again, and I've got his, I'm not sure if it's his mate, they do say they're mates, Coetzee Laurus Basson, who was a flight test engineer. And he's also a guy who said to me, he's going to grill Steve. He's going to ask him 50 questions at least, but we won't get to 50 questions. So I want to introduce my guest here, the author, Stephen Coetzee. You're welcome here, sir. I'm grateful you came back to us. Your episodes were very popular. The same with Laurus Basson. I think he left as a lieutenant colonel. His episodes were also very popular. I have set this up so that we can ask you all for questions about it, about this book. And since I have a bit of a flu, as you can hear in my voice, and I have to get up out of bed almost from my deathbed to do this. Yeah, we're all laughing. We should be. It's a joke. I will ask the first question, and then Laurus can start grilling him, and I will just sit here smiling now and then. Steve, what impressed me most about this book is that you guys were the first ones to do the night vision flying, I believe, with Nellis up in the operational area. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
As always, wonderful talking to you. And I won't comment too much on Laurus, but Laurus and I've got a love-hate relationship. Good friend of mine, like him very much. The night vision goggles actually came as a requirement with respect to the bush control of terrorist movement at nighttime. So there was a curfew imposed on all local population not to move around past a certain time at night. However, they were reported from all the tower posts that, natural fact, there was a lot of vehicle movement. And the Beaufort towers at Rundangwa had the monocle NVGs. And obviously give these to servicemen, they'll last for a little while because they're lovely toys. And they broke these. So Neil came to me one afternoon and said to me, Steve, do you think you can fix these? And he gave me a couple of these monocle NVGs. I took a look at them, and I had to fashion some straps for them. I used a inner car tube, not a tubeless tire, but a tubed tire. And I fashioned these straps and made sure that they fitted properly on my head, with a helmet mounted. So your SAF standard bone dome. Made sure I could get them sitting and that I could wear my glasses. I used to wear glasses those days. And then I tested the NVGs. They just needed batteries and a bit of a cleanup. Some of them were rusted up, so I cleaned that out. Got them working perfectly. And then I had a debrief with Nellis about what we would be doing. And we sat down as a crew to Alouettes that night in the ops room, and we had a discussion about what do we want to achieve. And the objective really was that with the NVGs, I would be able to pick up targets, and I will be able to confirm that those guys are not supposed to be riding where they're riding, etc. And then we would fire warning shots just to give them a little bit of a hurry up and wait type of thing. So needless to say, we got airborne and we went to the end of the runway. We have a target that we always used to pull off a couple of shots. Nellis went into orbit. Obviously, he can't see a thing because I was the only one on NVGs at that point. So he had to maintain altitude and airspeed. And I would talk him into the target. So I spoke him into the target, cocked the cannon, pulled the trigger, and was immediately blind because the monocle NVG could not shut off when it sees a flash of light. That was the first generation NVGs. So I reset, and then I started working with, I'd blink my eyes as I pulled the trigger, and that worked perfectly. So I got a couple of hits on that target as such. And then we continued to fly a route via Oshikati and then back to another LZ, and then from there back to Ondangwa. And en route, we saw a truck, and it was busy, obviously, with lights off, trying to hide away from us. And every time he steps on the brakes, you see these beautiful red lights. And I mean, easy target. So I pulled in behind him, spoke Nellis around him, and every time you see the brake lights, Nellis would say, oh, I got him. I said to him, okay, fine. You just stick to your orbit, and then I'll give him a little bit of a come up and wake up type of thing. And then we gave him a little bit of a hurry up and wait thing as well, put in some 20 mil HEs behind him, quite a way behind him. And the doors flew open, the people ran out, and I could see they weren't carrying weapons. So obviously it was just local pop, not abiding with the curfew. And that really did a debrief after that with Nellis and with the other chopper, because we had two choppers and just we had the NVGs. I spoke to the engineer and briefed him on what we need to do, and that we would do another sortie in a night or two, depending on how things go. And then I had to write a statement of the procedure of what we did and how we applied it. And I submitted this to Nellis. Nellis then submitted this to headquarters. And it wasn't even a couple of days later when they actually approved it and said, go for your second sortie and see if you can get it done. And that was the beginning of the lunar ops on Alouettes.
Chris, firstly, I would like to thank you for asking me to come and interrogate the Bright Spark, because, and I'm not being mean or facetious towards him, that's his self-assigned title. If you watch his first program, for those who have watched it, if you haven't watched it, go and watch his program and you'll understand what I'm talking about. My questions that I have, and I'll follow, through the book, is basically some that I have and some which I thought maybe other people would know, non-Air Force type people. So, Steve, eerstens wil ek net vir jou sê, dit is 'n ongelooflike boek, dit is 'n fantastiese boek, want nie net het jy al jou ervarings neergepen nie, wat soos ons in Afrikaans sê, jou lewe was ingestampe maatvol. Daar was baie ervaring en regtig goeie dinge, maar jy het ook jou siel ontbloot, want jy het vertel van die emosionele dinge wat jy deurgegaan het. So dit is regtig prysenswaardig, en ek dink dit is 'n fantastiese boek wat elke mens moet lees wat iets wat met die oorlog betrokke was. So baie dankie daarvoor. Now, in your book, like Koos mentioned in the beginning, you had a lot about, and what I liked is you for example, described where you were involved in an ops, but then you would give all the history before that, the political, the historical, and not just that. For example, where does the Caprivi strip, the name, comes from? So you must have done a lot of research. What was your main sources that you found this, the background information?
That is a very good question, and I'm thankful that you asked that question, because as I've traveled the world, you probably are faced with the same questions every single time. I mean, when I first got to Canada, having been heartbroken as to what happened to the heritage of South Africa, the first questions that come up to me are, you must be happy that apartheid is over. And that opens the floodgates of, are you stupid? Don't you really read history? Don't you understand? And that forced me to, in actual fact, start the history of Africa, because very few people really know the history of where they are and what they are, and even less about other countries. I mean, I often watch these game shows and they ask, what is the capital of a country? And the person says, oh, they didn't know that was a country type of thing. Or what languages do they speak in Canada? English and Canadian, or French and Canadian. So that's what prompted me to actually go back in history, find out the purpose for it, apply the logic of what actually forced the situation, and then the action and the aftermath.
Nou wil ek begin by jou skool daar. Jy sê jy het op skool rugby gespeel. Wat se posisie het jy gespeel?
Man, in school, I was a short, stocky little bugger. And in fact, I had far too many muscles then. I don't know what the heck happened to them since. But what I did was I was very quick. And I ended up playing a lot loose forward in the scrum. But at the same time, I was pretty agile. And I used to backfill as fly off and scrum off as well. And I've even had a couple of stints at fullback.
Okay, ja, nee. Nou sê vir my, die belangrikste vraag van hierdie hele gesprek is, wat se span het jy ondersteun? Provinsiale span.
'n Rugby span.
Ja, maar wat se ene?
In my youth, it was the Springboks and the All Blacks. Those were my two favorites.
En die provinsiaal?
Oh, well, that varied because I moved all over South Africa. So it started off with the unfortunate, the guys with the blue balls. And then, when I eventually ended up down in the Cape, which is probably the best part of my life, it was definitely Western Province.
sien jy daar's hoop vir enige mens om te rehabiliteer. Sien jy, ek is bly om dit te hoor dat jy die regte span uiteindelik by uitgekom het, die VP, die wenspan.
Maar mag ek hoor by julle ouens as weermag gespeel het of lugmag teen Army of so iets, wie was julle outomaties lugmag se kant? Het julle ooit 'n rugby-span gehad? En nooit gehoor van julle nie. Actually.
Ja, ons het 'n rugby-span gehad. Ja.
Okay, my internet and connection's unstable. So I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Nou kan ons, ja.
Yeah, okay. But one rugby story I can.
Maar ek moet dan vir julle sê, nee, ek besig om nonsens te praat oor die lugmag, want was mannetjies roe en daai ouens was hulle nie vlieëniers gewees en ook
Ja.
Wat het oom Ad het 'n klomp goed te sê gehad oor die rugby ouens?
Ja, Pixton het saam met Steve gewerk by Eenlig Depot en hy verpraat ook daarvan in sy praatjie. En mannetjies roe was 'n vlieënier as ek reg onthou en blykbaar was Frik de Pre, ek dink hy het afgetree as 'n kommandant by voortrekker hoogte. Maar om jou vraag te beantwoord, daar was elke jaar 'n lugmag kampioenskappe en dan van al die eenhede het bymekaar gekom. Ek was so 'n keer of wat daar gewees en dan kies hulle 'n lugmagspan en dan het hulle nou teen ander spanne gaan speel. Interessant, toe ek offisierskursus gedoen het by die Lugmag College, het ons 'n wedstryd gespeel teen die Leer College. Jy weet, so 'n rugby span, want hulle was net so eentjie van ons af by die Kolonel Adams het baie gepraat van die Leer College van sy stafkursus. So
Piston van Wyk was my journeyman at 1AD.
Oh yeah.
He was the hooker. But I wanted to tell you a story about my primary school days in Lowveld High. At least in the Lowveld in Malalaan Primary. We would play rugby against the Afrikaans kids. So at break time, there would be 5 Englishmen and 45 Afrikaners. And then we go play rugby against them. So, you know, we had to be pretty strong to play against the rock spiders.
You know, my wife always say there's only 2 surnames in South Africa. It's Coetzee or Coetzee. There's no other names. So she'll be glad to know that there's some Englishmen amongst us as well.
Hey,
Koos, jy weet die trappe van vergelyking van naar Pienaar Kots en van Brakel, né?
That's great.
Okay, laat ek aangaan. Okay, Steve, you mentioned that you were called up for your national service in 74, I think, to the signalers, but you decided to go to the Air Force. So how did that work? Because somewhere you went for selection. Where did you go to the Air Force? And then somebody had to tell signalers, no, you're not coming, you're going to the Air Force. Can you just tell us the sequence of events there?
My dad was in the Air Force in the war, so I had a natural affiliation to the Air Force. And besides that, we were not a very rich family, so there was no way that my dad would ever afford for me to go for tertiary training. So the only way, and doing a bit of research, talking to people, etc., I found out that the Air Force actually will sponsor our training and further studies, etc. And that really excited me because I needed to qualify better than the rest of my family, or at least attempt to. As you know, conscription during those days, you used to get your call-up papers in the post. Got my call-up papers about a year before, and immediately started writing to the Air Force headquarters, got the address, wrote them letters, etc., etc. And lo and behold, I got an application form. When I got the application form, they went through the whole process, and I was called up to Pretoria to the old Air Force headquarters, and we went through a selection board process over there. And it was about, what are you here for? No, I want to be a pilot. No, you're too short, you're too ugly. Go sit over there. Okay, you look like you want to be a flight engineer. Okay, I'll be a flight engineer. So cool. Sign here. Good. We'll see you in June of next year. Bye-bye. And that's how I got signed up.
Okay. And then you reported at 68 Air School, which later became the School for Technical Training, and then for School for Logistic Training, of STO, School for Technische Opleiding, School for Logistieke Opleiding. Did you do your basic there or at the gym?
No, at 68 Air School.
Oh, so the basics at the gym only came later, which was, the gym was opposite.
Well, the basics for gym, the gymnasium basics was at that point in time for all the campers, at least for all the citizen force, and okay. SLT was for all permanent force.
Okay, I see. Then, Steve, I'll ask you a few questions on your training, and firstly on your training as an AME. Can you walk us through the syllabus, what you did to give a good idea? Because I remember, and you mentioned in the book, you did your basic workshops, then you would do, I think, PT technical training or something, then you would go to the squadron, and then after whatever time you would come back and do your final test. You know, where did you do the test?
Okay, basically, you know, if you look at your AME, aircraft maintenance engineer qualification in the commercial environment those days versus the Air Force training at that point in time, is that there was a set syllabus for you to qualify. First of all, it's an apprenticeship. So if you're looking to see what is the apprenticeship line, well, in the Air Force in those days, you were actually more qualified than your commercial counterpart for the simple reason that you were taught all the basic trades to get going. So if for example, you want to be a fitter and turner, then you would be focused on lathe machinery and all the tool making criteria, etc., etc. Whereas in the AME training, you did the lathe work, the sheet metal work, the electrical work, everything was included to give you a bigger perspective of what it is that you're going to be looking at. Because it's not just to maintain an aircraft, but natural fact to know how it is made and how to apply the logic of how an airframe is put together, how the electrics follow through, how the mechanics come in, how the undercarriage works, etc., the engine, the power plant, the propellers, etc. So you get the basic training of all this. And then to counter that, the practical application of this was at the various, at those point in times, the depot, one air depot was a prolific third level maintenance unit. And they would send you to specific shops to get more detailed training on those items that you need to qualify as an AME. And then to add to that, they would post you to a squadron of where this your future application as an AME would be applied. For example, we spent time at Donata on the Harvards. I mean, what an experience! If you haven't done an oil change on a Harvard in the middle of winter and stick your hands into 20 liters of F-gas when it's freezing in the morning, and then still have a bunch of freaking Harvard oil fall over you as you pull the sump plug out, then you haven't had any apprentice training. So that was very important, you know. And then you progressively, as you're going from the workshops to your desk book training, your courses that you need to qualify, because you needed a minimum technical qualification to be able to qualify as an AME. And they called them national technical certificates. And you needed at least 2 of those blocks behind your back to, in actual fact, validate that you can do maths, you do understand science, and you have an understanding of strengths and materials. I mean, these are 3 critical components of becoming an engineer. So they initiate your thought thinking for if you want to develop further in the future. Once you've done that, they actually put you then back on an advanced training course to prepare you for the qualification criteria. And this is a lot of books again. You're going into the details of what is our hydraulic system, what is the requirements for a power plant, how do you set timing on an engine, how do you work on a fixed variable propeller, how do you set the revs, etc. How do you do trims and tabs, how do you do aileron settings, trims and balancing, how do you actually do patching on an aircraft with aluminum, how do you do doping on a fabric cloth control surface, etc. So you do very detailed from the old to the modern type of stuff. And those, the moment that you get to a point where you actually are now ready to qualify, then they would give you a set period to pre-study. So you'd look at the pre-study material with respect to what is the textbook written requirements. And then you would be called back to 68 Air School, where you sit down and do an exam. And that is now your exam to qualify from a written perspective that you should be able to pass as an AME. Once that test has been completed, and you were only allowed 3 attempts at that. If you failed it, then you have to go back a year and study again. So you pass that, then you in actual fact are put to test, and the trade test board would in actual fact come visit you at a squadron, or they bring you to 68 Air School, because they actually set up a trade test center there eventually. And they would say to you, right, you've got a carburetor change on that engine, okay? You've got 3 hours, make it happen. And you actually have to go and set that carburetor. You've got to do it, the installation as per the maintenance manual or the instruction manual. Then you've got to make sure you set the settings right. And once you've got that right, they'll actually start it to see that it does start. So they test you through to make the whole thing work. And once you've passed your trade test, you are now qualified as an aircraft maintenance engineer in the South African Air Force. So very, very detailed training. And I must say, I learned so much in my apprenticeship days, that when they qualified me as an aircraft maintenance engineer, I felt confident to work on any aircraft that you put me in front of.
Okay, but now I have a question. This is very good and well, and you say at some stage in your book, you say that you then found out that you're actually quite good with maths. Was it during this phase, or did it come a little bit later, where you realized you can actually calculate?
Okay, as in my book, I have to go back again. At school, I was really good at sports, and I don't know what. I think I went to an English high school, and we had a very English headmaster, and the English headmaster didn't like an Afrikaans surname. So I was put at the back of the class and forgotten about, and sort of chastised, etc., or victimized, picked on. Yeah, I'm not crying wolf here, but once you turn a person negative about doing something, they don't want to do it. So the result was I failed maths in matric. I failed it horribly, and I rewrote it out of my own. And I got a friend of mine to help me study, and I just scraped through. So I made maths. And when I joined the Air Force, one of the first subjects that came up was maths and science. And I got that cold shudder up my back. And in my book, I mentioned about the guy with the hearing aids. He used to turn the hearing aids down, and we would whisper, and then he'd turn them up, and then we'd talk normally, and then he'd have to turn them down again, you know. Man, what a fantastic teacher. Absolute fantastic teacher. And in the Air Force specifically looked for people that could teach their students properly. And I found an incredible interest in mathematics. It seemed like such an interesting topic to me. And all of a sudden, algebra, everything that I hated in the past, all of a sudden became interesting. And when I wrote my first exam and I walked out, and the guy says to me, "Are you finished?" So I said, "Yeah." He says, "Don't you want to recheck?" I said, "No, I'm happy with it. I got a distinction." And I mean, to this day, you know, if I could pat myself on the back, I would. But it's going to be difficult because I'm short, fat, and ugly.
Koos, ek moet net iets uitwys. Hy het 'n onderskeiding gekry wat 80% was in ingenieurswiskunde, maar iemand het duidelik nie vir hom verduidelik hoe werk die puntestelsel nie. Want 50% is 'n deurkom. 51% is 'n onderskeiding. 52% is vriende, gesins of familieverwaarlosing. En 53% is navorsing, en 54 en enigiets meer is gatkryp. So I never said that but I just want to go back to the training, and because when in my studies for our first and second year, we had to do technical training, practical training, which came out of the AME's handbook. I've still got mine here. This is the book. It's very thick. It's A4, so it's a big file, and each task. So and because I would assume, because it comes out of your book, are really structured. So if you have a look, that you've got a task, I can maybe send it to you in detail. You got task, you have to describe it, and then at the end, sergeant or whoever must sign it off and say you've done the task. So this one, for example, I showed you was when I was also at one air depot for the practical training, where we did the balancing of the turbine rotor on the C-130 engine, the Ellison. But the point and by the fact that this came out of there, we just did a sample set. You do a more complete one, but it was very structured. It wasn't just you there at the squadron. I would imagine that was the same for you, Steve.
Well, Laurus, I'm glad that you bring that up, because every student would get a task book, and that task book has to be completed for every task that they do. It doesn't stop there, however. In flight engineer training, you get the same book. And the detail here is that you have to be able, for example, on a Puma, they want to know that you can change an engine, that you can change a gearbox, that you can change blades, you can do rigging, that you've changed the fuel tank, that you've done radio corrective procedures, that you can actually change radios, that you can do instruments, and et cetera, et cetera. So you've got to task every damn thing. And the good thing about this is the more you do it, the more proficient you become at it. So a task book was part and parcel of your process in the Air Force. And as a flight engineer, for example, it didn't just stop there. Your emergency procedures was a monthly thing. And you had to write your emergency procedures, and you had to have them marked. And you had to get a specific passing. If you do not pass 80% of your emergencies, you don't qualify, and you got to rewrite it. So it's so much so that if your emergency procedures, you fail them once or twice, they can pull your medical. They'll pull your medical and say you're not fit to fly, just because you didn't pass your emergency procedures.
Yeah, Steve, interesting. I did that. This was the Puma. I spent some time on 19th Squadron. You had to explain draw the hydraulic system, which I couldn't. But at that time on the 19th Squadron, there were the groot geeste eisters like Kenny van Straten. I was a gobby car looking the ouens met sulke groot oë. Soutie Selden, wat 'n plesier om na sy stories te luister. Commandant Church was die bevelvoerder, en interessant genoeg, my eerste flip ooit in 'n helikopter was Steve Calinetti, die bevelvoerder, die gesagvoerder, en hulle het 'n opleidingsvlug gedoen, en hy het later 'n toetsvlieënier geword, het ek met hom by Tefos gewerk. So maar groot geeste daar, so as 'n KO wat ek met sulke groot oë gesit en kyk na hierdie ouens. Ja. Steve, jou dit kom terug na Koos se vraag van die wiskunde wat jy by die college gedoen het, en jy het Maitland toe gegaan as 'n college. Het jy jou skool wat ons in die skool?
I started off at BTC's college.
Okay.
In 2 and then 3 there. We only started doing the Maitland Technical College in Cape Town when I was doing my N4, N5, and N6.
For the diploma?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then, Steve, on the same vein, can you go and describe us, like the syllabus, what you did on the, well, firstly, flight engineers, you went for selection. Can you just say a few words on what your selection process consisted of?
Well, the obvious questions are when you go through the selection board, and you've got your psychiatrist, your technical, your senior officers, etc. I mean, it's a table of, if I give it right, it's something like 12 people, if I'm not mistaken, Laurus. And those people basically grill you. You sit in a chair away from the conference table. These people all sitting there. You're in your full uniform. You've got your little cap held nicely on your arm. And these people grill you with all the questions required to find out if you are mentally prepared to accept the task that they're going to throw at you. Because it's not a paint by numbers, you're a dummy, now you're a flight engineer. There's an application of what type of psychological person who's got the acumen and who's got the strength of long holding to be able to push through all the tasks that are required and then work under the pressure required to make this happen. Because you're sending a crew that are going to cost a lot of money to train into an environment that is very, very dangerous. And then you're expecting them to fulfill a task that the government is be paid a lot of money to get accomplished. So from that perspective, you're sitting there and answering all these questions. And I don't know if you've ever been intimidated in your life before, but that is pretty intimidating. And when you walk out of there, you have no idea, absolutely no idea, whether you're a total failure, a misfit, or if you flew through with flying colors. You have no idea. And then immediately after that, they would send you a signal and say to you, report to MMI and go and do medical, which itself is quite an interesting task. I mean, all the medical tests that they put you through is part and parcel the same as what the pilots go through. And you know, at that point, I was pretty fit, so that didn't bother me at all. But the medical tests are really detailed, very, very detailed. You do the cough and then your nose and throat and all the other necessary things. You do the lung function where it's breathing. You can't breathe. You got to remember pop, man. And then they say breathe out. It's about fainting from breathing out. You can't even exhale anymore. You feel like you're going to fall on the floor, and they tell you to exhale more. So they did all these medical tests on you, and post those tests, then you would get an approved signal to report for flight engineer training.
Stephen, next, can you go into a more detail in what's in the flight engineer training? Because I get the first thing you would have to do a conversion onto LOs if you're not current on LOs, you know, and then you did some academic phase, the flying phase, the weapons phase, or whatever. Can you go take us through a chronological step of what you did, what subjects you covered? And I guess some of them were together with the pilots. I believe you did navigation in your book. You mentioned that, so you did that with the pilots. So can you just give us a good idea of what your training consisted of?
Well, when you first report to AFP Bloemspruit at what they call now helicopter flight school, in those days was 87 Advanced Flight School. The first thing that you do is basically go back to basic training, because now you're a troop again. Because the whole concept is, if the pilots have to go through this bullshit, then so do you. Okay, you're going to be crewed up with a guy that's been pushed through the same pain as what you're going to be pushed through. So you go back into running around like a freaking troopy. It doesn't matter if you're a corporal, a sergeant, flight sergeant, or a warrant. Doesn't matter. You're going to start running around, because here you're a troop. You're an under-training flight engineer. You're a troop. Get going. First phase is, in actual fact, the technical training. And the technical training is because guys are coming from, like I was fighter qualified as an AME, guys from transport aircraft, C-130s, Transals, guys from Impalas, guys from the Kudus and the Bosbooks and Cessnas, etc. Everybody who applied now had to get the basic conversion to helicopter, rotary wing. So the technical training is even more detailed than natural fact you would do for your trade test. So the pre-study material, all the bookwork, etc., you go through detail of. When you've completed the detailed training in that aspect, the next phase, natural fact, is to introduce you into the basics of flying. So you go through the basic aerodynamics, you go into the standard general aviation regulations, you go into navigation training, and then from that, you get introduced into aircrew working. How do you work as an aircrew together? And once you've achieved the required pass rate for this, because remember, RTU was standard protocol. Those guys who don't make it, return to unit. There's no second choice. You've got to come back the next time if you want to retry this. So once you've done the textbook work and you've actually proven that you're technically and aircrew minded enough to be able to go to the next phase, will they introduce you into the flying phase for the first time? So you don't really get into an aircraft until such time as that they think that you're ready to do so. Even then, a qualified instructor flight engineer will fly with you, and he'll sit at the back while you sit in the engineer's position, and he will monitor your process all the way. Because you've been trained what to do, you've been trained what to say, you've been trained how to react, you've been trained what to monitor as far as the engineering part of the things are concerned. He sits and monitors. And when he feels that you are ready enough to be able to take charge as a flight engineer, he will sign you off in your task book. Okay. So he signs you off in your task book, and now you become a solo UT flight engineer troop. Piece of crap. Okay. And you will be put through all the tests that are required. You've got to do general flying. You've got to do hoisting. You've got to do coggling. You've got to confined area landings. You've got to do navigation. You've got to do the square bash patterning. You've got to do rotation patterning. You've got to do more confined areas. You've got to do more coggling. You've got to do more hoisting. You do it. It's repetitive, and then they prepare you for mountain flying. So you start off with slope landings, then you start off with touching certain undercarriage points to hold the aircraft stable, to offload and load up stuff, etc. When that is all completed and you're passed into the mountain flying phase, then everybody packs up for a holiday in the Drakensberg. Yeah, right. There you only start working, because now you're all drums. You do maintenance in the field. You've got to put aircraft covers on. You've got to freaking do pre-flights and after flight inspections during darkness with flashlights and stuff to that effect. But the mountain flying phase is a tremendous application of everything that you've learned, because you're now actually enacting. How do you sense which is an updraft on the wind or leeward side of the mountain? How do you approach the updraft? Where do you land? How do you position the aircraft? And you both make the decision together, the pilot and the flight engineer. You sometimes have to throw smoke out to identify the correct wind blowing. If you don't have smoke with you, you've got to look at the points around you. Where's smoke indicating the wind is blowing in this direction? Or where is the trees being blown over one direction? You can see and ascertain how to approach a pinnacle to land on. When you land on the pinnacle, how long you're going to stay there, what are you going to do, what's the approach, and when you take off, what's your escape route, how do you get off it, etc. And mountain flying phase, really amazing. Learn to fly in the updrafts, you learn to use the updrafts, learn to approach pinnacles, land, learn to do cargo slinging and hoisting in the mountains. Apply this logic, and you'd spend a week in the mountains doing all this. And I mean, we're talking about the Drakensberg. So you're going up to 12,000 feet. That's a lot of altitude for a small little helicopter. When that phase is finished, then it's R&R time down to Durban. And now, thin air in the Drakensberg, down to coastal, you got lots of power and you're flying along the beach. So it's just really a job, but it's to get used to the power differentiation. And the rest of the weekend, get up and go, have fun, return to Bloemspruit. When you're back at Bloemspruit, first thing now is final preparations, final tests. So everything that you were taught, you tested on. Your ability to do confined areas, your ability to do pinpoint hoisting, your ability to do pinpoint cargo slinging. I mean, planting a pole inside of a rubber, or inside of a tractor tire is not for the faint-hearted. You know, you got to do it accurately. And all the other tests that were put into it, getting all those completed. Then you go into the gunnery phase. And the gunnery phase is they teach you about the weapons, because in your books, you've been taught about what weaponry the aircraft will carry. Then you go through a practical change phase where you learn how to operate the weapons. Now it's the application of this. So you mount the weapons yourself, you load the weapons yourself, and then you get into the aircraft and you go and test the weapons. And based on that, you need to read a certain amount on target to be able to pass the gunnery phase. And on our days, we had the 303 Browning, we had the twin 5.0 Brownings, and then we had the 20 mm cannon. In later phases, obviously, we had the binocular system, and then we had the hydraulic mounted servo system, etc. So a lot of weapons came on, but during that phase, we would qualify. And then back to the Bloomsprite, and then it would be final reviews, personal interviews with the people to check their status, whether they would be able to make a qualification, etc., etc. And then once that decision is made, then RTUs are no more, and they prepare you for receiving your flight engineer wing, and you become a pucker-known flight engineer for posting to the squadron. And as you see in all the movies, when the guys have now got their wings as pilots or whatever, you actually get your posting. And then from there, each one gets posted out to the squadron, post the receiving your wings on the parade.
Steve, your wings, can you just, sorry,
No, I just wanted to know if these wings can ever be removed from you. Is it possible that you do something so wrong that they tell you cannot wear them anymore?
Why, Coetzee, are you thinking of reporting me for something?
I'm thinking of it. There's quite a few things in that book which is very, very juicy. I think of Sharon and a few other names.
As far as I understand, the wearing of a wing is the same as being issued a commission. If you're dishonorably discharged, I think the chances are that you will lose all your decorations.
Steve, there were the wings, the white, silver, and golden wings. Can you just say the amount of hours, because that's based on hours that you have? Or,
the white wing was your original qualification as a flight engineer or a fairly educated bunch technician. And then the silver wing was for 1,000 hours. And then the golden wing was for 2,000 plus.
Okay, thank you. So then in your book, after your flight engineer training, as jy na die eskader, die eskader toe verplaas in Kaapstad. Wat 'n addisionele spesifiek vir maritieme operasies opleiding het jy nou gedoen? Want daar was, ek dink, 'n jaarlikse dunking training en daai tipe van goeders. Kan jy net daardeur gaan?
Well, in my book, I mentioned the fact that obviously at a maritime squadron, you're going to be operating off ships, naval ships, okay? And operating off a naval ship, you obviously are taught. So you've got to go through the same type of introductory training, technical, how you do onboard ship operations, and then how do you fold blades for blade folding, how do you stow an helicopter, how do you put it out, how do you prepare it for landing. You even do basic flight deck officer training, how to show an aircraft in, how to release it from the deck, and so on. Then at that point in time at 22 Squadron, what your flight engineer had to do as well as a diver's course, so that you would be a rescue swimmer. So we did the diving course at the Navy at Simonstown, and did the basic diving course, which qualified us as rescue swimmers. And then you would do standby as a flight engineer for callouts, local AC rescue callouts, etc. And then you would also do a week's standby as a diver. And then you'd get some time off again, you go back on the roster again. Diver, engineer, etc. Other than that, the preparation really was similar to do a conversion onto the Westland Wasp, which was at that point in time operating with the frigates. So it was the technical training, then the flight training, and then after that, you were qualified as a flight engineer on WASPs, and we used to go to sea with the frigates.
Thank you. And Steve, then you mentioned you decided to leave the Air Force and you went to work at Fields at that time. What aircraft did you work on at Fields? Because when the time when I was there, they were doing the major servicing for the Harvard, the DAC, and the DC-4s. Was it the time? Yeah. What aircraft did you work on?
I worked on mostly the Harvards. We did major rebuilds on the Harvards, and then I did a stint on the Viscount as well when it came in.
Okay. it was quite interesting. I saw the DC-4, the beams in the roof was too low, so they had to lift the nose and so the tail drops and wiggle it in until they're in a gap in the trusses and then lower the nose. I think in fact one time there was a fire and they couldn't get it out fast enough, and one of them burnt, and I don't know if they burnt out or got seriously damaged.
No, it got damaged, yeah. They had to repair it, yeah.
Yeah. Then
Wait.
Steve,
How do you lift the DC-4's nose up? Because that thing is on tricycle gear. It
Yeah,
stands
you pull the
like
tail
this.
down. You pull the tail down. Because if you load, you know when the DC-4 lands, it's got a stud that sticks out on the tail. All right. So if you load a lot of cargo in on the back, she actually sits down on the arse.
Then Steve, getting to the border, can you did a lot of bush trips. I lost count. I didn't have enough fingers. Do you remember how many bush tours you did?
Yeah, you know, I did many.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
so much so that my daughter, when she was 8 years old, I'd only seen her for 4 years.
Wow.
So, no, there was a number of tours. I mean, during the peak, when it was Protea, Carnation, Meerbos, and all those things, one after the other, I actually spent a month up, month down, month up, month down, month up, month up, down. And then when you're back, you still got your standard tours that you got to do as well. We've got to deploy to Bergville, or you go on a rescue or something to that effect. So a lot of time away from home.
And then, Steve, can you run us through, I know it varies, but the typical contact situation in sequential order from the time you get called out, you're going to prepare the aircraft, pilot briefing, navigating to the point, you know, calling the ground forces, engaging in the contact, you know, coming back. And I mean, all the time you're facing actually not just the enemy that could shoot you down, because you still have to fly the helicopter, otherwise you're going to crash it. So, you know, there's must be a very, very high workload in the aircraft between you and the pilot. So can you run through that, what happens, and also your workload, the coordination, you know, to give a feeling to the viewers of this high, because it must have been immense, you know, the workload.
Yeah,
because while you're firing, you must check the aircraft limitations, you know, otherwise you...
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it take you through a typical contact. If you do a standby, for example, you're doing a standby at Ondangwa, you'd either be on top cover for the day or you're on call out. So you'd always have 2 aircraft on call out and then 1 on top cover. Top cover would then escort all the aircraft landing and taking off, and the 2 on standby would be the guys for any contact that is raised. Now, I mean, a contact from Ondangwa or contact from a Hague or contact from another base, they're all the same. The first that gets radioed up is, hello, this is SAF Ops Yanana. Hello, Yanana, this is Elouette standing here on the ground looking for people. Okay, that's kaput. So they would initiate a basic of they've got an imminent contact, or they're in a contact, or they're tracking SWAPO on the ground, and they need assistance because they're going to bump into a contact very shortly. So the aircraft would be prepared. We would have already done the pre-flight inspections. We would have already made sure that our ammo is full. And what we always do is carry a bit of course in the aircraft. So you've got sustenance, and you've got water with you, ready for the day. And first thing would happen would be they'd phone the aircrew bungalow and say, hey, contact aircrew bungalow or the hangar, because we'd either be in the hangar or aircrew bungalow, and then we'd meet at ops room and quick debrief for the pilots. The pilots tell the pilots, okay, go ahead, get the location, plot your flight path on the nav, etc., etc. We're going to go sign the author book. You do an entry into the authorization book, sign that off, and make sure that the aircraft 700, which is the aircraft technical log, is signed off for the flight, prepared, etc. The pre-flight signed, everything else, and then the pilot would come in and just sign acceptance of the flight. Meet up, pull the covers off, get the barrel into the 20 mil, make sure that the aircraft is ready to go, and then pilot would arrive, strap in, start up, and then off we go. First clearance that we do is we get a call sign, and then from that call sign, that's what we report going forward, and take off normally towards the end of the runway, pitch up, cock the weapon, test the weapon, make sure it's working, and then leave it on, switch it on safe, and head out to the contact area. On the way, then we would be briefing each other about what to expect, what we're going to look for, what we're chasing. For example, if we're doing a Kufut follow-up, then we say, okay, fine, what have we got on the ground? No, we've got trackers on the ground, and we've got Casper vehicles with the troops following it. And we're expecting so many SWAPO terrorists, or they're not sure if there is something, but they're following tracks at the moment. So we get a bit of a picture. So by the time that we arrive on scene, we call for smoke, and they would throw smoke on the ground. You pick up smoke pretty far, flat horizon, you can see it for quite a while. Pick on the target, and then when we're approaching, we're communicating directly with the lead Kufut on the radio at that point in time to ascertain what is happening, how far they are. Then we immediately brief between the two choppers who's going to be doing the immediate orbit to follow it, and then the second one to leapfrog, go forward. So we would always be in that direction, fly over the direction of what they're following, tracks that they're following, and we'd go ahead. So we go about 5 clicks ahead, and the other one overhead. And then we would widen the orbits, because the effect, cause and effect, would normally force the terrorists to ground. And when it forces the terrorists to ground, it's actually quicker for the trackers to pick them up. At the same time, what we're doing is we're monitoring our fuel utilization. We're planning ahead for when we're going to have to refuel. We're trying to ascertain how much fuel the Kufut groups have brought with them, or if we need to divert to a closer base to go and refuel, because we don't want to both disappear and then they hit a contact. So we would then pattern our fuel down and say, okay, fine, the first aircraft will depart at that time and go and refuel, other one will stay in orbit. And then when the other one gets back, the other one goes for a refuel. So we start discussing this, make sure we're all on par with what we've decided. And then as we come over the target, we immediately go and do what needs to be done. One on orbit here, 1 5 clicks ahead. And we would then keep leapfrogging all the time until a contact is hit. The moment a contact is hit, the first thing that we do, in actual fact, is make sure that we're not facing each other, that we're in actual fact facing down the target. It's best to have the other aircraft 188 degrees opposite you, facing down. The moment that you're flying in that chopper's shooting environment, Coetzee is going to take you out. A 20 mm HE is a small hand grenade. It is a terrible, terrible weapon. In 5 meter killing radius on hard ground, it will destroy a helicopter very quickly. So you pick up your targets, take your targets out, but at the same time, you've got to apply the logic of 60 knots. Anything lower than that, you're gonna end up with an unharmonized cannon. You've got to be at about 600 foot. Otherwise, you're going to have to readjust your harmonization. So you've constantly got to check what's the airspeed, what's the altitude, airspeed, altitude. At the same time, monitoring your fuel. At the same time, monitoring the engines to make sure you're okay. When the pilot does a tight search, you're quickly looking at the power to see is it not exceeding the power limitations. Because if you pull too much power, you're going to burn the engine. And the jet pipe temperature climbs very quickly. So you're doing a constant sweep between the two of you. And then as the contact is hit, the excitement obviously peaks. And when that excitement peaks, you've got to make 100% sure that the pilot flies the aircraft. Because sometimes a guy would get excited and he would pull the aircraft right around and bang, you can't see anything. Because the banking of the aircraft takes the total harmonization of the cannon away. Or he would roll away because he can't see something and he wants to see. So you've got to make sure that the patterning between the engineer and the pilot stays constant. I've got him visual, just keep banking left, roll out a bit, bank left, roll out a bit, bank left, and then you keep the target on sight. Once the contact is complete, we would stay in orbit until such time as the ground troops have swept the area to check for any additional terrorists and make sure that there's no danger. And then if at that point in time, the area allows it, we would land and we would debrief with the troops. A morale booster for everybody, but at the same time, it's a good lesson learned for a quick catch up on any lessons learned. What did we do wrong? What did we do right? How did it work out? What should we do better next time? So this would be a standard operating procedure. And after that, depart back to the base, and then standard operating procedure that after that is get drunk.
I want to ask you a question, Steve, as well as you, Laurus, because I know you worked on gunships. A modern gunship like the Apache or the Royval shoots forward and perhaps 30 degrees left or right. So it's sort of facing the enemy. It's coming towards the enemy or it's hovering. You people were shooting to the side.
Yeah.
And you were circling. Which is the best, do you think?
It varies. I mean, the Puma itself is also side firing. We would mount cannons in the Puma as well. But the fact remains you've got a limited speed, and a Puma is a very fast aircraft. The Royval is built as a gunship. So it has got more azimuth. It's got 180 degrees sweep left and right. So it's not what's best. It's what weapon you've got available to you to apply the logic. The Alouette is late 1950s, early 1960s technology. The reason it was side firing is for the simple reason the cannon was too big to put anywhere else. But at the same time, it afforded you the opportunity to do much more with the cannon. In modern warfare today, I don't think you'll find very many side firing weapons except in close contact areas. And the weapons are improving to such an extent now that they can be mounted on any way, in any platform, anyhow possible. Those weapons are that we used were very old design, and they were applied according to what the technology was at that point in time. But they were very effective.
Okay, but if you're sitting and you're sitting sideways, and I'll show a picture here of what it looks like, and you're looking this way, the pilot's looking that way, and you're still monitoring the instruments in front of him, which is about, what, 1.5 meters that side. So what are you doing? You're twisting your head all the time like this towards the enemy and towards the instruments.
You'll be amazed what you could do with these heads. The position you're sitting on an aircraft, you're basically behind the pilot. You're just slightly ahead, slightly to the side of him. But if you look to the right and you look straight down, you can monitor everything that you need to do. And the pilot, the whole purpose of aircrew management, or cockpit management, as it were, is the communication. If you say, I've got him visual, then he doesn't have to worry. You've got him visual. If you don't have him visual, then there's a problem. Okay. So if you've got him visual, you will pattern the pilot into the position. For example, you see the guy and you lift your cannon up now. The comfortable position is to have the cannon at a good aiming area, because you want to harmonize it. So you talk him into a position where the target, cannon, aircraft are all in a perfect harmonized line. And when they're in that position, you're clear to fire.
Okay. Steve, next question. You talk about operation from Marienfluss, where you got shot in you had a fuel leak and you had to land. And you talk about the chewing gum and you het vir die parabats gegee om te koop. So die eerste vraag, waar het jy die kougom gekry en hoeveel parabats moes kou aan die kougom?
Okay, there were 6 parabats do rondom verdediging, so they were our protection group, and the Puma had a bunch of rackpacks, and I had a bunch of rackpacks. In the rackpacks, we had what? Bubble gum. But at the same time, I had Sunlight soap as well, and a whole conglomeration of whatever. You do the best with what you can, as quickly as what you've got.
Ek dink jy moes hare in die gat gestop het, want kougom klou altyd in hare. En dan
my gat was already blocked at that stage.
En dan Samuel, SW4U vertel van as die lugmag hulle kom optel, die eerste woorde wat die ouens geuiter het was, "Eers, wat stink so?" As hulle inklim. Het jy die geleentheid gehad om rekkies te ruik?
Yeah. We've had lots of, the one thing that when the guys have been, even the Bushman 3-2 battalion guys, when they'd been hot on the trail of something, you pick those lads up, man. It's quite a honk.
Steve, and then in your book you talk about the Seeker UAV. Can you just mention where it was applied and how successful it was? And you mentioned it briefly in your book. Can you give more details on that?
Just repeat the question. What are you talking about?
The Seeker, the unmanned vehicle.
Okay, man. I actually ended up at Janhana as a contact standby. We were pushing some swapper trips, terrorists back again into thing, and I saw this funny looking little aeroplane over there, and I thought, what is this? So I walked over, and the other guys had the container, etc., and bang, bang, out walks Spider. I look at him, I said, Tim Spider, what the hell are you doing here? He was in matric with me in Lowveld High School. And he says, no, we've got a unmanned flying vehicle that we're busy using here. So I said, oh, okay, explain me the process. And we spent the day actually watching what they were doing. And the application of the Seeker was phenomenal. It was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, they would put the thing up there to loiter at a certain altitude, and they could monitor troop movements. They could monitor troop movements better than what we could with all the photos we were taking, etc. So the application was fantastic. It was really awesome.
En dan Steve, jy het baie foto's in jou boek en daar een plek praat jy van 'n tank wat uitgeskiet en dit lyk soos die tank wat brand op die foto. So onder andere, ek dink op die program van Koos, die foto is 'n foto, is daar 'n foto van jou van agteraf in die helikopter met jou wiskundepunte agterop A+. So waar wie het die foto's geneem? Was dit jy? Was dit ander mense? Waar het jy dit gekry?
Yeah, most of the photographs are either shared amongst, I mean, our aircrew share so many photographs. We're constantly swapping photographs backwards and forwards, because in those days, for us to have cameras in the bush was a no-no. We weren't allowed to take photographs, and it was illegal for us to bring in cameras and take them home, type of thing. So the photographs that surfaced are normally all magnesini. We're hidden cameras, etc. So that's where all these photographs come from, and that's why the guys are quite happy to share them. But there's a lot of those that you can't claim fame to. You can only tell stories about what you did, and at that point in time, those photographs are applied because that's how we operated. So you couldn't photograph what you were doing, but somebody has recorded it somewhere, and that was important for us.
Then Steve, after you were seconded to the police and you helped them set up the air wing, and then you came back on deck as a flight engineer.
That's right.
That must have been quite an adaptation, because it's totally different role from a gunship to a deck. How did you experience that?
Well, I mean, in all people's careers, things happen for a reason. Things happen for a reason, and at the time, I thought it was a hell of a demotion and a slap in the face, etc., and blah, 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 blah. But the period on decks was probably the most enjoyable aircrew combination communication process. Cockpit management was really amazing. The people that you meet was fantastic. The trips that you do and the crap you can get up to when you're on duty is amazing. So the whole experience, as short as it was very memorable. And I'll always fondly look back on the days that I spent on decks.
And although you were short there, did you ever do a sorties where you drop parabats or parachute, the special forces or anybody, or were you so short there? Mostly in your book, what I could read was transport, No,
we just training drops. That's it. I've never been involved in the detail of the only operational flying I did was really resup missions and a couple of trips from Grootfontein quarantine in, etc., but no detail. I never operated the Dragon, which is the gunship, etc. I just my period was too short. My objective was to get to Pumas. That was my objective.
Okay, and then you moved on to the Pumas, and you talk about the NVG flying. And again, can you, for the viewers and people not, familiar with detail of the coordination, who's in amongst the crews, the two pilots on the Pumas, the engineer, who's doing what, who's got the NVGs? So you can just run through that.
Well, a very interesting fact, and I want to broaden your horizon on this aspect. During the Desert Storm War, the Americans lost more aircraft due to night vision goggle operations in brownout landings, etc., because I don't think they applied it correctly. The strangest thing is the South Africans stole the Generation 4 off their production lines, and that's what we copied and made locally. Progressed the operating of night vision goggles so much from the lunar ops into the Pumas. And I mean, Ken van Straten was one of the initiators on Pumas as well with Commandant Church, and they can give you a real deep story about this. Ken involved me in the beginning stages where we, in actual fact, built specific panels with ultraviolet lights to light up the panels so we can wear NVGs in the cockpit. Now, when you're operating a Puma with NVGs, there would always be one person on the panel. That is the rule. Because of brownout, because of the three-dimensional confusion when you're wearing NVGs, because things are not actually where they seem to be. You can see them clearly, but they're not. The depth perception is not the actual that you can see in normal vision. And the rule was you would have one person in the cockpit at all times. So the co-pilot would be on the nav. He would have the map, and he'd be on goggles looking at nav points. Okay. The engineer would be on panel, and he would be looking at everything engineering plus aircraft attitude, altitude, airspeed. Aircraft attitude, altitude, airspeed. He'd be updating the navigation systems. At that point in time, we had what the heck was that damn thing? Not the TANS computer, the Doppler. We would update the Doppler system, and we would do the fuel transfers. You would validate the engine conditions, hydraulics, etc., plus continue the battering. Now, I mean, it's easily in a 3.5-hour flight that you would go through about 4 liters of water because you're constantly battering. If at a point in time the co-pilot comes into the cockpit, then the flight engineer would go out, okay, to continue. Because the more eyes outside, the more you are in an environment where you're okay. And the rule was everybody cannot be on NVGs. Someone has to be on panel, always on panel. And that, I think, is the success story of the South African Puma operations as night vision goggle.
Thanks, Steve. And then on Pumas also, you talk about the one sortie that you took P.W. Botha and some of the ministers to Jamba, Dawie de Villiers, Puck, Magnus Barend. How were these people as persons? Who was the nice guy and who was the stug and the niet so vriendelike ou dalk nie?
And Puck was always a party man, as everyone knows. I mean, Puck was a star, absolute star. PW was a less, it wasn't as stiff as you would expect him, but he maintained his pose as a prime minister or state president. And I mean, we respected him for what he was. Dawie de Villiers was reserved, very reserved. And then Barend du Plessis he's a bean counter. What do you expect? I mean, good God. But Puck was a star, absolute star. I mean, he made jokes with us. He got up to crap with us. We got up to crap with him, So it was constantly jostling with each other. Great fun. But what an honor to be in the presence of those gentlemen.
And Savimbi, did you have interaction? I mean, how was he as a person that you found him to be?
Absolutely amazing. His communication, his ability to lead, his ability to be able to be an example was fantastic. I had greatest respect for Jonas Savimbi.
Thank you. And then you talk about your Antarctica trips. That must have been something. I mean, it's another world. You talk about the Puma, you know, the standard, if I can call it standard, the SAF one, and then the J models. What were the differences in, if any, in systems, you know, for the J models versus the SAF ones?
Well, I don't know if you know, but the J models, the SAF J models, or DEA J models, were the first ICE certified Pumas in the world. So Eurocopter at that point in time actually manufactured these aircraft with full de-icing systems and full emergency standby systems. So, for example, they had de-icing and anti-icing systems on the main rotor blades, tail rotor blades, as well as on the windscreens and on the pitos. Then we also had an additional hydraulic system. So we had the emergency hydraulic system to it as well. Plus, navigation systems in that aircraft were fantastic. We had the TANS computer. So the TANS computer coupled with the Doppler was an amazing, amazing thing. This is the years before GPS, in fact. And besides that, the aircraft had additional fuel tanks. So it could take an extra 800 pounds of fuel with 2 sponsoon tanks on each side, one on each side, plus the 5 internal tanks. So really, really, really an amazing aircraft.
Thanks. And then you went on officer's course as an Oman. That must have been quite although you were very fit, I guess, so that didn't seem like you had problems.
Yeah. No, well, one of the good things about the Air Force is it actually does, well, the Air Force used to. Used to make sure that in actual fact all their personnel were at least at a level of health where they could look after themselves. But I think after the first time that we were actually shot down in the Marine Flush, I actually took avidly to becoming good at running, because you don't know when you're going to need to start running. So I started running marathons and I kept my fitness level pretty high. And then when I left the Air Force the first time, I had to go and do orientation in the Air Force again, which is basics again. So I did my initial basics, orientation basics, flight engineer basics, and then officers basics. So I've done it 4 times, man, and I know how to do it. So don't challenge me.
So you survived Hocha on officers course.
True.
Yeah, and then you were appointed as the system managers on the C-47 TP, the turbo deck. Can you maybe just talk about what your responsibility, because that's an immense responsibility of the whole system, you know, and basically the foundation of keeping this operating, you know. So can you just describe what this system manager responsibilities entail, you know, the job?
Oh, for sure. You know, we had a decentralized responsibility as system management for the C-47 turboprop as well as for Pilatus Astra at 2 Air Depot in Eysterplaat. And the reason being is that Colonel Fluffy Dempers at that point in time had established the capability at 2 Air Depot to become a 3rd level base unit. So in other words, we could manufacture, repair and overhaul and do just about as much as 1 Air Depot to a certain extent on the required weaponry. Based on that, we took over the system management function of the C-47. They were still being produced on the production line at the old Shackleton hangar. It was rigged out to now manufacture turbo decks. And as they came out, we would do the acceptance of these and then make sure that we have the complete supportability platform. In other words, the integrated logistics support planning for this to support the vessel in its operation. So we would release the aircraft to the squadron. We would ensure their spares are available, that in actual fact that they had supportability for the aircraft for its set period. We would do their predictive maintenance planning for them when they had to come back for refits or when they had to come back for maintenance actions. And I'm talking about the planned scheduled major maintenance actions. Then we would also ensure that we had the the field service engineer support groups available should the aircraft go down within a set radius of southern Africa, that we would be able to go there, in actual fact, get that aircraft up and running again, and then bring it back. So we actually wrote a contract with Air Force Headquarters to certify that we would provide 95% aircraft availability, factoring in how we get this done. So we would sign contracts with subcontractors in and outside of the Air Force. We would ensure that our spares min-max levels were set at the optimum. We would make 100% sure that the long lead items would have repair stations set. We established a repair contract for the engines in South Africa, plus the propellers and the avionics support as well.
Thank you. Can you just, there were a few variants, I think a Maritime one, the sort of the standard, how many were there? I sort of lost track. I was involved initially, but then I moved on.
Well, the original planning through the initial Air Force planning was, in actual fact, to say, okay, we're going to have a standard a trooper and cargo carrier. Then we'd have a VIP version, and then we'd have a maritime conversion, which is, in actual fact, a palleted type that we would slide in the pallet of all the maritime instrumentation that we required. And the only airframe modifications would be for the spark plug and the dinghy dispatch, etc. Those were the versions. But before I even left the Air Force, they'd only produced 2 VIPs, and they were basically canned straight away thereafter, converted back to cargo. And then I think there were only 13 maritime patrols built.
And then Steve, getting to your, you talk about your the personal problems from the war, the leftovers. There's one title in your book that says Long Road to Recovery. And you talk about, you know, Steve must work out what is messing him up. And the one night you were at home, and then Russell picks up your friend, the Priya, you know, so you had these people that step, you know, like friends are. But is it correct, like for me, your turning point, I want to say turning point was the event you describe in your book where you went to Bouwbergstrand with your motorbike, and the next morning you woke up and you realized, you know, what a beautiful, you still mentioned it was a beautiful sunrise, and you realized you had PTSD and you had to do something about it. For me, that sound, from what I read from the book, that was sort of the road to recovery for your title, you know, the first step to recovery for Long Road to Recovery. And then also, obviously, you met Annie in that time, your lovely wife, you know, which just gave you this momentum. Is that the correct assessment?
No, 100%. I mean, you know, the first signs of divorce and PTSD and depression are always the denial. Denial. There's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine. And then the second phase is anger. And anger is a part that pushes you back to denial again. You know, so you're fighting between denial and anger, denial and anger, denial and anger all the time. And you don't understand what the hell is going on with you, because it's a stupid statement. You know, what am I denying myself for? Why am I so angry? And once you've realized that you are an arsehole and you've got to wipe your crap off, then the acceptance part, and that was the initiation of my acceptance. And I mean, you know, it's not a quick recovery. It doesn't come easy. I mean, there are times when you're sitting talking to somebody and something would trigger something again, and bang, you're back in it again. So you've got to constantly be aware of what you are and who you are, and you've got to build inner strength, and that inner strength is critical to any recovery of any side.
And you mentioned in your book that you made an effort to focus on the positive, you know, to do that. Then I've read a lot of times with people with PTSD and things like this, you know, they say if you go back to the scene of the trauma, like if you were involved in a battle, you know, go back there as part of the, you know, recovery. When you went on a tour to northern, to Namibia, did you find that help? You know, you went to 3-2. You went to the bases. Did you find that out?
You know, the whole Namibian trip was really just to show my family who I was, because I don't think anybody really knows who we were. the war we fought was a war that was unknown. And I just really wanted to show them. So I don't know if it was a spiritual journey. I think it was just a goodbye journey because I knew I was leaving the country.
Okay. Steven, then your trademark, your kenmerk was jou rooi baard geweest. Ek's amper klaar. Jou rooi baard geweest. Kan jy verstel hoe het jy die baard gekry en hoe het jy hom verloor dat jy vandag so lyk?
That's strange. You know, my ex-wife, when I met her with the beard when I was out of the Air Force for that year. And so one of the things she said is, yeah, you can't shave your beard. So I got psychosis barbia. I don't know. A doctor told me you got psychosis barbia. So I said, okay, thank you. I got psychosis barbia. So I gave my medical certificate and they said, you got psychosis barbia. So I said, okay, excellent. So I had a beard. And then I got the nickname of Fidel Castro by 3-2 Battalion. Wherever they used to see me jump out of the aircraft, Fidel, because I wore my Fapla camo jacket and my Fapla cap, as I was Fidel Castro. And I wore a beard up until post our divorce. And I mean, I went on officer's course with a beard. So when I got posted to 2 Depot, Fluffy and I still had a little bit of a officers discussion one night until we fell over. And I went home and I decided to shave my beard. And that's why I look like I do now. A true gentleman.
Sommer net so. And then second last question, you talk about in your book the trip you took with a motorbike to Zimbabwe. And you mentioned in there when Steve was last in Rhodesia and it changed. When were you in Rhodesia and for what reasons? Holiday or was that part of the Air Force?
Hey, are you writing notes down now? You're going to send people after me or something?
No, I'm recording it, so don't worry.
Okay, good. No, I did one trip there to support the Rhodesians.
Okay. And then last question, you talk about the Flight Engineers Association. Is that still active? Is it still ongoing? You spoke about in your time there was a branch in the north and the southern part.
Well, we initiated it in the hopes that it would form into something, but I think the country changes so much that it's more now a comrade group, and the guys are actually tunneling towards moth clubs and Legion associations, etc., which is actually a better thing to do because you've got a bigger group.
Steve, I'm asked a lot by the people here on Legacy, which I want to write books. And sometimes they even send me the manuscripts. Just yesterday, I read one from a Parabat, very good book coming out, telling his life story. This morning, we spoke for 2 hours. And it came out that writing the book really assisted him. It made like feeling, okay, this is now behind me, perhaps I can move forward. Did you have the same idea or feelings when you wrote your book?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you know, everything you do, as I keep saying, the positivity in life is what sets you aside from the negativity. And maintaining the positivity is to realize, because you can't forget anything. If you forget anything, then you're not well in the head. I mean, things have happened to you, you've got to accept them. So work on the positive, accept them, and remember them for what they were. And I think the best thing that we as aircrew did in the Air Force during those bad years was to lighten the mood with everything. Everything we did, we got up to so much crap, it was unreal. I mean, you recall so many of the stories. Sochi Sarden and I were probably the naughtiest flight engineers at Rondangwa. And we got up to so much crap, it was true. But that's what lightened the moment. And if you focus on those end stories, the bad that you've gone through is always rewarded with a joke afterwards, and focus on the joke. So yeah, no, book writing would help, definitely. If you're that way inclined, or even just to sit and share your stories, makes a big difference. There's a big difference between sharing and bragging. Be very cautious.
Well, yeah, of course. I wanted to ask something about the aircrew, the Ray-Bans and things like that, but since I've asked both of you before.
I speak to Laurus, he knows about that.
Yeah, Laurus, what do you know about Ray-Bans?
Yeah, he likes to wear them.
Nee, ek het vir hom ons gesê, nee, ek het vir hom gesê, my kop was te groot om die goed te dra. En dis hoekom nou verstaan ek, hoekom die ouens altyd gedink ek is dom, want ek het so na hulle gekyk, so met skreefies oor.
Ja, dit is nog wel 'n vraag wat ek jou wou vra, maar Laurus het my voorgespring, Steve. Daar toe jy nou die tweede keer basics doen, jy's daarom nou al klaar 'n vlugingenieur. Nou hardloop soos 'n hoenderhaar rond met die kinders wat nou uit die skool uit gekom het. En jy passeer weer eens uit en nou het jy sommer jou sergeant rang seker terug en jy's jou, jy weet jou wings en goed is op jou chest.
Ja.
Hoe die ouens wat saam met jou deur die basics is, hoe het hulle gereageer daarop? Ek meen het hulle geweet jy's 'n ou man.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they treat you with disdain. And this started right in the beginning because the biggest problem was that Ray Bashka was the senior instructor. And he walked in and said to me, "You're the course leader." Oh, shit. And then once they'd made me the course leader, now all these kids are turning around and saying, "Oh, you know, it's because he's an old man, you know, blah, blah, blah." But I think the Air Force takes your leadership and they expand on what you've got as a natural leader, and they teach you how to deal with it. And I must admit that I won everyone over. And by the end of our course, people were taking my advice and they were actually, in fact, following what we were setting for them. And we did very, very well. The group did very well. I was really proud of them.
I have to ask you, where's this book available? Is it still on Amazon as well as on print on demand in South Africa?
That is correct. It's available on Amazon and it's available by, what's that guy's name?
Ian Love.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's available in South Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put the links on here for everybody. I've really enjoyed this. I must tell you, I got out of bed. I was quite ill when I started here. I'm still quite ill. But I did laugh. I laugh a lot, and I wish to thank both of you. It's a really good book. I want to say to all of you, try and read the thing. It's not just a story. It is actually much more than a story. It's a deep book. I think Steve can be called also from now on a deep sea. I don't know if Laurus will agree to that. Laurus, do you agree? We can vote, yeah?
Ja, baie diep, baie diep.
Okay, what's your new nickname, Steve? Steve Diepsee en Coetzee.